Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through your source materials, articles, notes, research to pull out the key insights for you.
That's right.
Today, we're diving into something really critical: interactions with law enforcement, specifically focusing on this concept of escalation.
Hmm.
And just to be clear up front, this isn't about, the legal rights and wrongs in a courtroom sense or the morality. It's about the practical consequences on the street.
Exactly. Our goal here is to really unpack the insights from the material you send over about how these encounters, well, how they can spiral really fast,
Yeah.
and how small things, words or actions can have these massive unintended effects.
Yeah.
It's about being informed,
Mhm.
basically, knowing how these complex situations actually play out.
And I've got to say, going through this material, some of it really challenged, my own ideas about resistance or what rights mean in that specific moment.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely some haha moments in there. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
All right, so the source kicks off with this really central, almost provocative idea. It frames it as, it's the escalation, stupid.
Yeah, blunt.
Right, it's saying, forget the debate, forget the morality for a second. What matters is the sequence of actions. The source argues this is absolutely crucial. Why is that framing so important here?
Well, it fundamentally changes how you look at the interaction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The source uses this striking analogy. It calls law enforcement dogs on the leash,
Okay.
meaning they're operators,
Right.
pure operators. They aren't there to debate the finer points of law with you or, discuss ethics on the curb.
Right, they're there to act.
Exactly. Trained to act, not argue. And it breaks this down further, looking at different types of agencies. Local cops, the source labels them theater.
Theater, what's the implication there?
Well, it suggests their role is often about visibility, presence, deterring crime by being seen,
Yeah.
like a public performance of order.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then you have state troopers, described as precision. Think strict enforcement, traffic laws especially, very by the book, methodical, not much wiggle room.
Got it. Precision. So understanding their specific function. And then there are the feds, the alphabet soup agencies, as the source puts it.
Right. IC, FBI, ATF, IRSCI, DEA, postal inspectors, HSI, the list goes on,
And how are they described?
as retrieval units with federal immunity. That phrase is doing a lot of work.
Retrieval units. Explain that a bit for us.
Sure, it implies their primary goal is specific. Secure a target, whether it's a person, information, whatever, and federal immunity highlights their broad legal protection while doing it. These aren't your local officers.
Which is why the source says, and this is pretty stark, once the feds get a ping, it's already too late.
Yeah, that's a chilling line.
It suggests that at that point, you, the individual, you stop being treated as a person with context or a story.
You become a data point. That's the term used.
A data point. And the
Right.
interaction simplifies dramatically to meet or compliant.
Meaning you either comply and get processed smoothly as data.
Or you resist physically becoming meat to be handled through force.
Exactly. And the source is quite dismissive of other factors here. It says things like community vibes, keeping a low profile, trying to self-police your area.
Irrelevant.
Totally irrelevant in that federal context. They're not listening to that. They have their objective.
Okay, so if that's the core principle, focus on escalation, understand the operator mindset. Let's talk about the path itself. The source calls it the unidirectional ladder.
Right, one direction only, up.
It starts seemingly pretty low level, right? Maybe just a warning. Check your license, registration, maybe a fix-it ticket for a broken taillight.
Yeah, the initial contact. But then the source details how quickly it climbs. Just getting mouthy, stalling, challenging the officer, even involuntary things like twitching.
That can be interpreted negatively.
Very easily. Interpreted as non-compliance. That can lead straight to charges like resisting arrest or obstruction of an officer.
And those charges then create...
Probable cause. Justification for more action. And the source lays out this potential checklist. It's quite the list.
Let's hear it.
Okay, it goes, ticket, leads to misdemeanor, leads to vehicle impound, then arrest, jail, bail denied, case opened, record tainted, pattern flagged, and finally target acquired.
Wow. That's a rapid ascent.
And the source makes the point that this whole chain reaction, this whole 10-year paper trail, as it calls it, it can start from something as simple as a tone check.
Just how you spoke to the officer initially, that's
Yeah.
sobering. And the source also points out that this full checklist doesn't fall on everyone equally, does it?
No, it's very explicit about that. It names profiles it sees as disproportionately affected.
Who does it mention?
It says poor, brown, loud, or driving a blacked-out Charger with 5% tint in a glass pack.
So specific visual or behavioral cues.
Exactly. And the point it's making is that for these profiles, the benefit of the doubt is often just
Yeah.
not there from the start.
Yeah.
Perception, based on appearance or perceived status, can dictate the trajectory.
Which makes that ladder seem even steeper for some. Okay, so if escalation is this swift and unforgiving, that brings us to another key warning from the source. It calls it the rebranding trap.
Ah, yes. This tackles the modern idea of resistance.
Right, the idea that resisting authority can be seen as heroic, maybe symbolic. But the source has a very different take. It states flat out, resistance has always been a felony.
That's the core legal reality it emphasizes. It argues that resistance, historically, hasn't ended well for the individual. It ends in cuffs, courtrooms, and cages.
So it's saying the consequences haven't changed, even if the perception has.
Precisely. It talks about a branding shift, how resistance became hashtags online, defiance became an aesthetic, a look, refusal started looking like a punchline with a payout, maybe hinting at potential lawsuits or settlements.
What the source argues that's a dangerous way to think about it on the street.
Very dangerous, because the state's view, its legal definitions haven't changed at all.
To the state, resistance is obstruction. That's a crime.
Defiance is noncompliance, grounds for action.
And refusal is justification. Reason to escalate force or charges. It's a total disconnect in language and meaning.
And if you lose that bet, as the source puts it, if your act of resistance leads to legal consequences, the personal cost is immense.
What does it list?
Your job, license, freedom, kids, housing, clean record, basically everything. It hammers this home. Resistance doesn't end in applause. It ends in processing.
Processing. Back to that clinical term. Okay, so if resistance is legally defined as obstruction and escalation is so quick, where does the law actually get enforced? Not in the abstract, but in reality.
Right. The source calls this the point of sale.
Like in a shop.
Kind of. It means the law is enforced right there when you're standing in front of the badge, in that moment.
No delays, no appeals right then and there.
Exactly. No script, no edits or do-overs. It's happening live.
And the officer's role in that point of sale.
The source is very clear. They are not your debate opponent. They're not there to teach you civics, not your moral agent.
What are they then?
They are the front end of a system. A system, it says, that's been trained to fear you, distrust you, and process you. Again, it's about their operational function.
And this ties into another warning about intentionally provoking officers, right?
Yes, it addresses the idea of baiting law enforcement, hoping to provoke your own martyrdom.
What does it call that?
A suicide vest made of lawsuits and body cams. Or Russian roulette for a payout. Extremely harsh language emphasizing the danger.
Wow. Okay. So this all leads to the core idea of this section. No manager at the curb. What does that mean?
It means exactly what it sounds like. When you're in that interaction, that point of sale, there's no supervisor you can ask for to complain to right then and there.
You can't say, let me speak to your manager.
No, that doesn't exist on the street level.
Mm-mm.
You can't escalate your complaint upwards in that moment. Your only choices, according to the source, are complying or you're escalating the situation downwards towards trouble.
And if you do eventually meet the manager,
That happens later. When you're in the precinct, your car's been towed, you're in a holding cell, and your picture's being taken, tagged for further processing. That's when management gets involved, but it's way past the point of a simple conversation.
that really clarifies the point of sale idea. Now let's talk about language itself. The source gets into how words can be deceptive in these situations. It uses this interesting analogy for the word refuse.
Yeah, the poet's analogy. One means defiance, the other means garbage.
What's the point it's making there?
It's highlighting the mismatch. Your intended meaning, your moral stance, your poetry, that's not how it's received. To the system, it becomes legal justification. It becomes paperwork.
So your words of defiance are just evidence.
Essentially, think about the actual legal terms. The source lists them. Resisting arrest, obstructing justice, interfering with an officer, failure to comply.
Those sound like actions, but they often start with words, right?
Exactly. Words that feel like standing up for yourself can be immediately logged as these criminal acts. The state logs your behavior, it says. It doesn't hear your revolution.
Your refusal becomes refuse. Garbage for the system to process.
Precisely. Processed, not understood.
And there's another chilling concept, being swept rather than targeted. What does that mean?
It suggests that often you weren't singled out personally. You weren't on some specific list they were looking for. You just matched a pattern.
A pattern? What kind of pattern?
The source gives examples. The
Yeah.
car, the rims, the tags, the posture, the glint, the vibe. It's about fitting a profile, however vague, that triggers the system
So it's impersonal in a way.
in a very chilling way. It connects to how the source describes officers, walking filter systems based on, 10,000 stops deep worth of experience or perceived experience.
Well, what's the core assumption of that filter system according to the source?
The cop thinks you're lying. That's the default assumption.
Everyone lies.
That's the mindset described. Assume everyone's working an angle because, well, people often do try to minimize or deflect. This leads to that stark warning.
Which is?
You're not going to talk your way out. You're going to talk your way deeper in. Trying to argue or explain can just dig the hole deeper because of that inherent distrust.
Okay, this brings us to the most serious consequences. The ultimate stakes. The source puts it plainly, people die.
Yeah, it doesn't shy away from the worst outcomes.
It gives examples, right? Small things escalating.
The wrong look, the wrong tone, a reach, a twitch, a phone mistaken for a gun. These tiny moments, misinterpretations in a high-stress situation, can lead to fatality.
And the source emphasizes the finality of it.
Right. It's not a headline that fades, not just a payout or a mural. It can be a closed casket. And all potentially starts from resisting the script, resisting that expected sequence of compliance.
Which leads to maybe the most timely and alarming point in the source material. This concept it calls the pH has changed.
Ah, yes. This is crucial context.
It describes a specific period, roughly 2020 to 2024. What characterized that time, according to the source?
It paints a picture of progressive DAs, no cash bail, COVID leniency, and importantly, cultural permission to push back.
An environment where maybe challenging authority felt safer or at least less consequential.
That's the implication, a time when you could run your mouth and walk, maybe get away with minor offenses, even things like filming yourself being defiant towards police.
But the source says that era is definitively over.
Absolutely. It states clearly with Trump 47 is in, and remember, we're just reporting the source's framing here, not endorsing political views that the environment shifted dramatically. It became acid.
Acid, what does that signify?
It signifies a much harsher, less forgiving environment, a shift where law enforcement and prosecutors are now far more likely, the source argues, to prosecute everything, every infraction, every act perceived as defiant, full force.
So acting like it's still, say, 2021 when the reality is 2025.
That's incredibly dangerous, according to the source. It warns about facing 2025 consequences, and it uses a really pointed analogy to illustrate this.
What's the analogy?
Orange County, not LA. Now, for listeners who know California, that implies a shift from a generally more lenient jurisdiction, LA, to a much stricter, more conservative one, Orange County.
So the consequences are far more severe.
Yes. You're going to get life, not likes. Meaning, the social media approval, the likes you might get for defiance, are meaningless compared to potentially life-altering legal penalties.
A very stark warning about misreading the current climate.
Definitely. The source concludes this point by saying that escalation now in this acid environment is like dry kindling. It's incredibly flammable, and engaging in it isn't just bad tactics.
It's what?
It's suicide, strategically speaking.
Wow. Okay, well, this deep dive has certainly laid out the stock mechanics of escalation as presented in these sources. Understanding these dynamics, these potential consequences, it seems critical.
Absolutely.
Our goal here wasn't to agree or disagree with the source's perspective, but to give you that shortcut to understanding the framework it presents, the mechanisms it describes.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with, building on all this. If you accept the source's premise about these interactions being about processing, not negotiation, how does that understanding the point of sale, the no manager, the way language is interpreted, how might that influence how you navigate other systems? Not just law enforcement, but any large bureaucracy designed to process you rather than debate with you.
That's interesting. Thinking about how behavior, not just words, might be the key in those high-stakes, process-driven situations.
Exactly. Something to consider. How much power lies in understanding the sequence, the expected behavior, versus trying to argue the merits? It's a powerful question to reflect on.